Good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure and privilege to be here. I have had the privilege of speaking to, in the last couple of weeks, quite a significant, probably close to 1,000 kids between the various schools that I've been in, and it's been phenomenal how engaging and well-behaved the kids have been on all age groups, which is coming from a Jewish environment where it's very possible that just because I'm a local boy, they don't listen to me as much. When I come here, I'm a little bit exotic, both from a faith point of view as well as an accent point of view. So people might give me more attention than they may give you. But it has been phenomenal that to engage these kids in some cases for an hour straight, and last week for an hour and a half. For years 7 to 8, it's phenomenal. So it has really been fantastic. I see a whole bunch of people coming in now.
Okay. Down the front.
Alrighty. So the topic that I've been given this afternoon is to talk about the Passover story and sort of the significance from days of old until the modern era. And I think the best way of doing it is I'm just going to tell you what we do and why we do it as a Jewish community. Because within the Jewish faith, now Judaism, I say this to every group, so it's worth saying to the teachers as well. Judaism and the Jewish people is very, very different to Christians and Muslims. Even though we sort of lump them all together as the three great monotheistic faiths, three great Abrahamic faiths, we are very, very different. Because a Christian and a Muslim, by definition, are their faith. So you cannot be an atheistic Christian or an atheistic Muslim. That concept just is anathema. It cannot be. If I'm a Christian, I therefore believe in God, in Jesus, and the gospel. Those go together. But being Jewish in no way necessarily relates to anything about their faith. So somebody who comes to you and says they're Jewish, all it means is that they self-identify as being part of the Jewish people. They may be atheists. So with the kids, I'm trying to think of famous Jews that are young enough for them to know. So I suppose I'm not with it enough to know young people, but no offense to anyone, but I can use a bit more mature. So everyone from Sigmund Freud to Karl Marx to Steven Spielberg to Jerry Seinfeld to Henry Kissinger. We can go through a whole list of Jews who are very Jewish in their self-identification, but in no way commit or practice the faith at all. And in many cases, so especially take like Freud and Marx, were antagonistic to the faith, but nevertheless very Jewish in their identity. And that is something where I suppose we differ, is we are people as much as we are a faith, or we are people that have a faith but don't necessarily buy into the faith. And so I can talk about what Judaism believes, but if you go out and meet a Jew, there's absolutely no telling what that Jew believes in and of themselves. They may not believe in anything that we share. But what is quite unique about the Jewish people is if we look to the gamut of Jewish practices, the most widely practiced Jewish ritual in all the Jewish communities, regardless of levels of affiliation or whatever stream, is what we call the Passover Seder, or to use a more Christian terminology, what was the Last Supper. So I'm not sure how many of you, the Last Supper was in fact the Passover meal that Jews traditionally celebrate on the 15th day of what is, I suppose, what I think you call it, the Paschal full moon. So it's the full moon that comes. So Easter is always equated that it is the Friday immediately after the Paschal full moon. So that Paschal full moon is what we call Passover. And Passover, because as God came, and when the Israelites were in Egypt, that God came and passed over the houses of the Israelites when he smote the Egyptian firstborn. So in but in most Jewish households around the world, this is an annual event that takes place, and regardless of levels of religious affiliation, in some form or another, this Passover story, Passover tradition takes place. And it is quite phenomenal that it's kept even more than the second most widely kept command, and that is circumcision. So they say it's upwards of 90% of Jewish men are circumcised, traditionally on the 8th day, but as far as Passover is even higher level. So what I wanted to share with you is a little bit of what that means to commemorate Passover in 2018, because a lot's changed. And the whole concept of celebrating Passover can at times seem quite strange. There are plenty of seats right down the front, I'm afraid. But
It's only me you have to sit next to.
So what I suppose we'll start off with is just doing a little bit of a recap. I have learned to not make any assumptions on biblical knowledge or lack thereof. But let's just talk a little bit about the Passover story, and then we'll talk about sort of how we commemorate it and remember it in antiquity as well as in the modern era. So the story goes as follows, and I'm going to jump from, let's say, the second half of Genesis all the way to the beginning half of Exodus. I'm going to give you a big synopsis. So Jacob has 12 sons. Joseph is the second youngest, loved at most by his father Jacob. Very jealous of all the other brothers. His brothers decide to take vengeance on him, throw him into a pit, eventually sending him down to Egypt, to which he goes, and for 20 years he sort of moves between being in the dungeon, rising into prominence, going back into the dungeon, and eventually working his way up to be the second in charge of Egypt, the viceroy of Egypt. King Pharaoh has a dream. Dream is about that there'll be 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. So Joseph, who is a dream interpreter, tells Pharaoh what is going to happen is there's going to be this great bounty for 7 years, after which the famine is going to be so severe that it will eat up all the bounty that had been accumulated in those previous years. So Pharaoh puts Joseph in charge. He starts accumulating all the wealth, not only of Egypt, but of the world. Comes those 2 years into this terrible famine. Jacob, all the way back in Egypt, says, we've got no food. We've got to send the brothers down. They go down to Egypt to get provisions. Lo and behold, who's in Egypt? Joseph, their long-lost brother. Joseph sends a message back to Jacob and says, listen, we've got plenty of provisions down here. Bring the family. Sit it out for the next 5 years in Egypt. We'll be able to get through this famine, and then we will be great. Jacob comes, uproots the family, goes down to Egypt, and they stay there 5 years, 10 years, and beyond. Famine comes and goes, and Jacob and the children stay in Egypt. Joseph dies, Jacob dies, everybody dies. And then we come at the beginning of the book of Exodus and says, a new king arose in Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he looked at the Israelites and said, these people are becoming too numerous and too populous, let's deal wisely with them. And puts on series after series of harsh decrees, initially just oppressing, then trying to kill the infants, finally with the throwing of the sons into the river. Moses' mother and father, they give birth to him, hide him for as long as they can, eventually put him. Now we get into the movie, right? So now even if you haven't read the book, you've seen the movie. So at this point, I think, now on this spot, you all know. So Moses gets picked up by the daughter of Pharaoh. He's raised in the palace. Eventually goes out one day, looks at the Israelites, sees an Egyptian beating up an Israelite, kills the Egyptian, runs away, and many years down the line. So exact timing is not clear. But at some point, 10, 20, 30, 40 years later, Moses is out shepherding his flocks in the wilderness, and he sees this burning bush. And from amidst the bush comes this powerful voice, Moses, I've come, we're going to go take the Israelites out of Egypt. So as Moses goes down to Pharaoh, he gets his brother Aaron to come help him out, because he doesn't speak too well. And he gets there, and he says, listen, Pharaoh, please can you let the Israelites go? And Pharaoh says, no. So Moses says, listen, it's really worth your while. If you don't, things are going to get pretty bad. So Pharaoh says, yeah, bring it on. And that's what happens. And we go through 10 series of plagues. So blood, I know it in Hebrew, I just have to try that. Blood, frogs, lice, vermin, wild animals, disease, hail, locusts, boil, darkness, and death of the firstborn, more or less. Okay, finally coming to on the eve of the final plague, that God comes to Moses and says, all right, that's it. 9 plagues down. Now we're going to finish this whole story off. But what I want you to do, so if you have Bibles, great. If you don't have Bibles, don't stress. The only reason that the Bibles are here is so that you know I'm not making it up. It's really, so you do not have to follow at all. If you trust me, and you should not trust me, but if you do trust me, it's there. So we are dealing now in Exodus chapter 12. And I will paraphrase. Alright? So God comes to Moses and says, alright, go tell the Israelites that what they're going to go take, they're going to take a lamb or a goat, one per household. They're going to take it on the day of the 10th of the month. And they're going to hold on to it for a few days. Now, just from a symbolic point of view, the Egyptians saw, we already see, when Joseph, one of the most bizarre stories, well, let me, by way of analogy, imagine there's an entire family that is moving here from, post the fall of the communist bloc, fall of the Berlin Wall. There's a whole Russian dynasty coming. Grandfather, children, grandchildren, 70 people in total. And they arrive down in the MAckay airport, alright, because they've relocated their whole family from Russia here to MAckay. And since this is a whole dynasty, a very prestigious family from Russia, so the mayor of MAckay goes with the two members of the federal and local member of parliament, go out into the tarmac, and they go and say, welcome to MAckay, such a distinguished family. Please tell us, what do you hope to bring to MAckay? Why have you chosen? And the head of the household gets up and says, well, in Russia, we were very prominent in the illegal gambling trade. And we realized there's a great opportunity to set up a number of illegal casinos here. Not only that, we were very prominent in the opiate trade. And we see that drugs have not been exploited quite in the MAckay community, and we are hoping to bring drugs into the community. So, as bizarre as that sounds, that's exactly what happens with Jacob. Jacob and his family come down, and Joseph goes to the brothers and says, listen, now this is at the end of the book of Genesis. When Pharaoh comes to you and says, so what do you guys do for a living? You know what you're going to tell him? We're shepherds. You tell him that we're shepherds. Because being a shepherd is the most detestable profession in Egypt. And when you tell them that, they will insist that you go live in the land of Goshen and that you separate completely from the Egyptian community. Make yourself hated on arrival. That's exactly what happens. Why was shepherding disgusting in the eyes of the Egyptians? Because they worshipped the flocks. They worshipped the lamb. So now you look a few years, generations later, God comes to Moses and says, you tell him, you take a lamb. You hold on to the lamb from the 10th of the month. This is back into chapter 12. You take it from the 10th of the month, you walk it through the town. And your Egyptian neighbors will come and say, what are you doing with that lamb? He says, we're going to offer it as a sacrifice. Imagine, your tormentors, for the last 400 years, you've been oppressed by these people, and now you're taking their image of God, and you're going to slaughter it. And then you'll take the blood, and you'll dip it with some hyssop, and you'll put it on the doorposts. And so they go, God, when I come through Egypt, I will see the blood on the doorposts, and I will pass over the Israelites' homes when I smite the Egyptian firstborn. And so it was that God comes at midnight. There's a cry throughout Egypt, not a house where there wasn't death. And Pharaoh comes and says, go, take yourself, get out of here. And the Israelites, and this will continue into the next chapters 13, 14, and 15, the Israelites in such a rush to go that the provisions that they were trying to, there's one thing, for the last 400 years we've been trying to get out of here. And then all of a sudden it's like, go now. So well, I got to go to Coles, I got to Woolies, I got to pack up some supplies. No, go. And so their dough that didn't have time to rise, they had to bake unleavened. And so this concept of unleavened bread, unleavened cakes, what we call matzah, becomes a central piece that we'll start mentioning. And they run out of Egypt 3 days later. Pharaoh has a change of heart. He sends his troops after them. Sea splits, everybody drowns, and we live happily ever after. So there's a bit of a summary. At 4 occasions throughout the Torah. Now, when I say the Torah, we're talking about the first 5 books of the Old Testament: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. That for us is the Word of God. Everything after that, the book of Joshua, book of Judges, Jeremiah, Isaiah, all of that stuff, fantastic stuff, very interesting, lots of good stuff in there, but not the Word of God. We go by the first 5 books.
Excuse me. I'll interrupt you there. I hate to interrupt.
Oh, no worries.
Why only the 5?
Because the reason for the 5, if you go look into the story of Revelation at Sinai, the difference between the qualitative difference between the first 5 books and everything else is the first 5 books were given by Moses, dictated to Moses by God. Everything else was prophetic insight, divine revelations to an individual who then wrote it down, spiritual, prophecies and the like, but not dictated. The first 5 books are qualitatively different because they are literally the Word of God. So where we would pick apart, so if you've ever seen, rabbinic students, in Talmudic study, so Google it if you haven't, it's worth watching. You'll see rabbinic students ripping their hair out trying to understand, because every single word of those first 5 books is godly. There's nothing superfluous. Like an editor with a fine-tooth comb, God makes sure that every word was relevant. Once you get to Joshua, so who wrote Joshua? So Joshua wrote the book of Joshua. It was divinely inspired, great spiritual insights, but Joshua wrote it. The book of Judges and the book of Samuel were written by Samuel. Also, phenomenal prophet, great insight, but not the word of God. And so therefore it has nowhere near this standing. This has been throughout history, the big confrontations that have happened between the church and the rabbinate was always, members of the church trying to convince the rabbinate from the book, specifically, or the book of Isaiah, why the book of Isaiah proves, that Jesus is the Son of God. And we say, listen, all well and good what it says in the book of Isaiah, but that means nothing to us. It's an important book, but it cannot overrule the 5 books. So for example, we talk of a Torah scroll. If you ever see a synagogue service, we read from the scroll. It's the first 5 books. 5 books have to be written by hand. Every single bit has to be reminded. If there's one mistake of one letter in the Torah scroll, the whole Torah scroll cannot be used. It has to be fixed or disposed of. And disposed of means buried. It is treated like a human corpse. If it is not kosher and it cannot be fixed, it is buried in a cemetery. The rest of the books, printed. There is something qualitatively different in those books. So 4 times in the Torah, I will use the term Torah now to connote those first 5 books. The Torah talks about remembering the Exodus from Egypt. Now it talks about it a lot more times. Many of the commandments talk about the fact you should do this because I took you out of Egypt. You should remember this, the stranger amongst you, because you know what it was like to be strangers in a strange land. So many times it talks about it, but in 4 separate occasions it talks about a unique kind of remembrance, specifically the interaction between parents and children. So within Judaism, and perhaps, and this I think is quite different between Judaism and Christianity in general, is that the rabbi of the family is supposed to be the parents. It was never meant to be outsourced to a rabbi. Because who educates the children? Not the rabbi. It's the parents. The vast majority of Jewish life takes place in the home, not out in the street, not in the synagogue, not even in the temple, but in the home. And therefore, it was crucial that the interaction between parent and child was something that was not only important, but crucial if there was going to be this ongoing memory. And so that place is that relationship and that educational tool is highlighted on the night of Passover. And so we're going to go through 4 different parts of the Torah where it talks about the kind of interaction, the kind of relationship that a parent and child are supposed to have, specifically regarding this ancient story and how it pans out. So now we're going to go into chapter 12. Yeah. So on chapter 12, it initially tells the story of taking the lamb and offering it, and then how you should eat it. But on chapter 12, verse 25, it says as follows. Actually, can I have some volunteer readers so I can get your translations rather than my translation? 25, go for it.
When you come to the land that the Lord will give you, as he has promised, you shall keep this observance.
Yeah, just hold it for a second.
Yep.
What observance is this? This is the observance of the Passover offering. That the idea of taking the lamb, yes, only once in history was a time where we took the lamb, used its blood, and put it on the doorpost. But the idea of this offering, of having a lamb sacrifice, the Passover offering, was an annual thing. So when you come to the land and you offer this, carry on.
And when your children ask you, what do you mean by this observance, you
Stop.
shall say.
Okay, stop. So there's an assumption here. You're going to be doing it, and your children are going to be witnessing it. And they'll be curious. Because they see you taking this lamb, slaughtering this lamb, eating it with the unleavened bread and bitter herbs, which was mentioned earlier in the chapter. And your kids are going to look at you and they're going to say, what is the service to you? What are you doing?
Yeah,
What is the
do you mean? Yeah.
why are you doing this? So what you should not say is, because this is what my father did and what his father did and what everywhere. This is what we've always done. Stop asking so many questions. Just do. It is not for us to question why, it is but for us to do and die. More or less, yeah? That's not what it says. You ask and you answer, so what does it say?
You shall say, it is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, for he passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt, when he struck down the Egyptians, but spared our houses. And the people bowed down and worshipped.
Okay, so question, so the first time, alright, so the first time it asks you, it says, what is the service to you? What are you doing? And you got to answer, well, when we were in Egypt, we had this terrible history. There was a terrible suffering, and we passed over, and God saved us. We killed the Egyptians. We have enormous amounts of appreciation to God that He spared us, and that's why we're doing this experience. Okay, that's number one. Now, if you go to chapter 13, okay, we're on chapter 13. So we're going to start from verse 6. I'll read the first part and then I'll hand over. For verse 6, for a 7-day period you shall eat unleavened bread. And the 7th day there shall be a festival to the Lord. Unleavened bread shall be eaten for the 7-day period. No leaven may be seen in any of your possession or in any of your borders. Verse 8, and you shall tell your son on that day, saying, it is because of this that the Lord acted on my behalf when I leave Egypt. So, what is happening here is I'm eating this unleavened bread. And rather than waiting for my child to ask the question, I'm instigating the relationship. And you will tell your son on that day, demanding that we as parents look to our children and say, not say, nothing, not just eat it, but hold the unleavened bread and say, we are eating this on account of the fact. Because that which God did for me when I left Egypt. Now, what should it say? This is what we're eating because what God did for them when they left Egypt. It's not saying that. It's an experience that what happened to me when I left Egypt. You have to be in real time. But second interaction is you will say, you shall tell your son. Okay, so on the second time that there's an interaction around the Egyptian narrative, first one was, what are you doing? Your kid sees you offering the lambs. What are you doing? He said, this is what we do. Second one is you go to your son and you start for them. Third one, verse 11, new reader, please. Volunteer. Like your 10s all over. Anyway, verse 11. Yes, please.
That's in chapter 13 still.
Chapter 13, verse 11.
When the Lord has brought you into the land of the Canaanites, as he swore to you and your ancestors, and has given it to you, you shall set apart to the Lord all that first opens the womb. All the firstborn of your livestock that are males shall be the Lord's. But every firstborn donkey you shall redeem with a sheep. If you do not redeem it, you must break its neck. Every firstborn male among your children you shall redeem.
Okay, so just hold it for So there's this idea over here, let's not worry about breaking any necks at this point, but let's just talk about the idea is that there's a significance to the firstborn. Firstborn humans as well as firstborn animals. There's something significant about them. Carry on. 14.
14. When in the future your child asks you, what does this mean? You shall answer, by strength of hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt from the house of slavery. When Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, the Lord killed all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from human firstborn to the firstborn of animals. Therefore I sacrifice to the Lord every male that first opens the womb, but every firstborn of my sons I redeem. It shall serve...
That's good. All right, so we see a third interaction. So here we're talking about firstborn. There's something sanctified about the firstborn. And when we do it, we go to our kids and our kids say, what's going on? It's slightly different from the top one. Here there's the word service. There's a divine service. Here, the question is something far more naive. Whereas the first one, the child recognizes that there's a service happening. There's a sacrifice that's being offered. This is the lamb that is being slaughtered for the Passover. And the child says, what is this divine service that you are doing? The second one is the child doesn't say anything. The parents just go up to him and start talking. The third one is the child just sees you taking the firstborns, redeeming the firstborn. It says, what gives? Final source. Go to the book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy, that's... Oh, I shouldn't test you, huh? Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Chapter 6. Chapter 6, verse 20. I'll read. If your child asks you tomorrow, saying, what are the testimonies and the decrees and the ordinances that the Lord our God has commanded you? You shall say to your child, we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and the Lord took us out of Egypt with a strong hand. The Lord placed signs and wonders and great and harmful against Egypt, against Pharaoh, and against his entire household before our eyes. And he took us out of there in order to bring us to a land that he swore to our forefathers. The Lord commanded us to perform all these decrees, to fear the Lord, our God, for our good all the days, to give us life as this very day. So there's the fourth question. The child asks, what are the decrees, testimonies, decrees, and ordinances? Okay? What are the decrees? What's it? Ordinances? And testimonies. Testimonies, etc., etc. Okay? So, what's prompting this question? So it's not entirely clear. If your child asks you tomorrow, now what does tomorrow mean? So this has been given in the book of Deuteronomy. So we are roughly 40 odd years post the Exodus. And we're talking about tomorrow. So tomorrow means in the future. Your children are going to start asking questions. And they're going to say, what are the decrees, the ordinances, the testimonies? These are all different kinds of laws. Within Judaism, there are 3 separate kinds of laws. Some laws are rational, logical. God didn't need to give them. We would have worked them out ourselves. Don't murder, don't steal. God didn't say don't murder. We would need God to tell us not to murder. Most societies throughout history have had a law not to murder. Then you get something what are called decrees. Decrees are things that don't make any sense. We only do them because God said it. So, of all the things I've said to all the classes, there's been one that has been more shocking than all others. And that is that Jews don't eat pork. And it has shocked the kids that they could believe that it is possible to survive without bacon. So why don't we eat bacon? One reason. God said don't eat bacon. That's it. But explain logically, I can't. That's what God said. God said to us for us to do a lot of different things. And there's no rationale. And it's not that it's difficult to understand. It's that God didn't explain it. God said, do this, don't do that. And some of the things we just do. So that would be one of the decrees. And then you get testimonies, which are things that perhaps are not necessarily logical. But when you do them, they make sense. And they serve another purpose, which is as to testify, to testimony. You keep the Sabbath. So Sabbath, I think there's a certain logic behind it. It's 6 days you work and on the 7th day you rest. But ultimately, why do you rest? Because God created the heavens and the earth in 6 days, and the 7th day rested. So too, and this is what it says on the commandment number 4 out of the 10, right? No tests, yeah? Yeah. There's extra bonus points that for this one. 10 Commandments is mentioned twice in the Torah. First time in Exodus in real time where it happens at the Revelation. The second time in the book of Deuteronomy where it's Moses recounting. The reason to keep the Sabbath is different in the book of Exodus as the book of Deuteronomy. In the book of Exodus it has to do with creation. The book of Deuteronomy has to do with remembering being a slave. And just as you were slaves and you didn't get rest, you should allow yourself. So very different. Anyway, so this becomes the framework within that the entire Passover ceremony revolves. That when we sit around, so this happens, and it always happens, immediately around the Easter time. So I sit around the table, I get all my kids there. We take our matzah, unleavened bread. We take our bitter herb. We don't have a temple anymore, so we don't do the Passover sacrifice. So we have little bits and pieces on the table that remind us of what would have been. And we start telling the story of leaving Egypt. And we start telling our children that not only did our ancestors leave Egypt, but this is an experience that we too have to live out and to remember. And what the book that we follow, it's called a Haggadah. Haggadah means to tell over, to tell the story. We focus around these 4 questions, which become, the way that it's written, we define them as 4 children. The 4 sons, to be more specific. So within Judaism, within the Passover ceremony, we say, there are 4 children. A wise son, a wicked son, a simple son, and a son that doesn't have the ability to even ask. Okay? So it says this is the way the Haggadah brings it out. It says, what does the wise son say? Wise son. The wise son says, what are these decrees, ordinances, and testimonies that the Lord God has given to you and commanded you today? And you should tell him that God took us out with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, took us from the place of bondage out into freedom, and that thus has commanded us to do the laws. That we have within this question, the rabbis looked at this question and says, what's a kind of kid? When it says that tomorrow the kid's going to ask a question, what kind of kid asks this kind of question? That they see Judaism in all its entirety. And they see that there's some logical laws, there's some illogical laws, there's some laws that sort of make sense, but not sort of. And they sort of analyzed it and been able to frame it in such a way that they really want to understand. So if I say, this is the wise son. His question, understand that the word son, daughter is just purely out of simplicity. So the wise child, this is how they are. But then, what is the kind of question? So it says that, what is the service to you? Now, if you go read in there, well, let's go look. If you go look there in number Exodus 12. Let me ask you something. If I were to say, the children wanted to ask a question, you would say, and the children asked the following question, or in the future the children will ask the following question. So if you look at verse 26, chapter 12, verse 26. Anyone see it there?
Yep.
All right, what does it say? You have got wrong translations. And I can say that because I can read the original Hebrew. So it says as follows. In verse 26 it says, "V'haya ki yomru aleichem b'neichem," and it will be when your children say to you, not when they ask you. The word to ask in Hebrew is shoel. The word to say To say something is to omer. Vayaki yoimru. When they say to you, what are you doing? This one, it's not asking a question. They're making a statement. So say our rabbis, what are you doing? It's rhetorical. It's not saying, tell me something, this looks fascinating. What exactly are you doing? It's not saying that. It's saying, what are you doing? You're crazy. So the rabbis say, what is this service to you? To you, but not to them. Because they've excluded themselves. They're not interested. They come in with this cynical mindset. They look at you and they say, crazy old people. Look what they're doing. The whole thing, hocus pocus, religiosity, makes no sense. And they just do it. You know, religion is the opium of the masses. You know, these people don't think. How do you deal with the wicked son? The son who's completely disengaged. So we have to find a way to deal with them. Do we reject them? Do we try push them out from the table and say, you know what, if this is your attitude, don't come? Or do we say, you know what, this is a symptom? The wicked child, and as educators, my guess is you all know that behavior in class is a symptom, not a problem. Very seldom do poorly behaved children, is that the real problem? There's something underlying. When the wicked skeptic comes and starts asking challenging attacks, seldom is because they say, we had a session today where the question we dealt with was what called ultimate questions on why do bad things happen to good people. So that is a very good question. But most people just sort of sit back in the back of the bus saying, I wonder why bad things happen to good people. There's obviously no God. They sort of just jump. Now, maybe they've suffered. Maybe they've experienced terrible pain in their life. And they've come to that conclusion. So, how do we deal with the wicked child? The child whose questions are attacking. So that's the second child that we have to address at the Passover Seder. Third child. He looks and he just says, Mazot. Mazot is, even in modern day Hebrew, if you go to a child and he sees you doing something, he says, Mazot. What's going on? No thought. Just see something unusual and ask a question. So the child who comes to his parents, he sees his parents doing something. That every night of the year, they have bread, and there's no bread. It's only this unleavened bread, this matzah. Every other night of the year, we eat certain foods, but tonight we're eating very different foods. And he looks at his head and says, I want bread. I like bread. There's no bread tonight. It's Passover. He says, why? It's a good question. And the child comes and says, why? So this is the simple son. Simple not as in lacks intellect. Simple as in asks a good question. See, we have often lost the ability to be simple. You walk into church. I'm going to go on a limb here, yeah? But I'm almost prepared to guarantee I'm right. You go into church, people are doing lots of stuff, and if someone says to you, why are they doing that? You'll be like, I don't know. That's what they do. The kid comes and says, why are they doing that? And it's like, just do it. The kid's asking a brilliant question. Why? Why do we do this? Someone decided once upon a time that we should be doing this, that this is a good idea. So I want to know what that is. So we often lose that ability, and this child with the beautiful naivety and innocence to come and see something that is out of the norm and want to understand why. So we have to find a place for them at our Passover experience. And the final one, the child doesn't even ask the question. You instigate the relationship. So this is what we call the child that can't ask. Can't ask, is too young. Can't ask, doesn't know to ask. But this child is sitting over there and they are bored. My guess in scripture classes, the truth be told, this has happened in every class, but scripture in particular, it's not that the kids are asking attacking questions. We just wish they'd ask any question. They just sit there zoned out completely. they don't have the desire to ask because they are completely disengaged and therefore don't feel there's anything worth asking, or they are so simple in their understanding that they don't even know that there's a good question to ask. You know, you need a certain level of sophistication to ask the question, why do bad things happen to good people? You need to be able to look at the world and say, there are a lot of bad things happening in the world, and it doesn't seem fair. But this one doesn't even have that sophistication. So come our rabbis and they say, when you are coming annually and you're sitting around with all your children, not that this is a nice idea, this you have to do. You have to engage with your children in a way that engages the intelligent ones, the skeptical ones, the simple ones, and those that are completely disengaged. You have to find a way to have the conversation with them. Because if this value that we talk about, being a Jewish people, is something that is worthy to perpetuate for generations going forward, we need to be able to create a framework that makes the tradition flow on. I mean, I say this very gloatingly, and I acknowledge that. Of a night where we as Jewish parents are forced to engage with our children, not just on any education, but on the sacred values that we hold so dear. And one night a year at least, we are forced to have the conversation about what it means to be Jewish, and what it means to connect to your heritage, and what it means to perpetuate that on to the next generation. And it becomes what's called within rabbinic terminology, it's a night of kings. And we sit around our table. It's interesting. I'll send to Gail. There's a very cute YouTube video. There's an American Italian comedian called Sebastian Maniscalco. I don't know if you've heard of him. But an Italian guy, and he gets invited to his Jewish girlfriend for Passover Story. And he gets there, he says, you know, he's Italian, he goes there and he's really hungry. And he sits there and he says, they start handing out pamphlets, the books, the Haggadah. And she says, we're not going to eat for another hour. She says, you know, he says, I'm Italian, and in 3 minutes I expect to have something to whip around in the first 3 minutes. Because that's what happens. If you come into my house, dinner's we expect you to arrive at 7, but we're not eating till 9. What are we doing for 2 hours? We are talking about the Exodus from Egypt. And so we engage our children, so maybe we'll have some sketches, maybe we'll have some songs, maybe we'll just have robust discussion. But the night is dedicated to how do I pass the flame on to the next generation? And this is the model that the Torah not only asks but demands of us, that we create that educational framework. So one of the greatest, let's say, traits within the Jewish community is we're very argumentative people. I mean, I know every tradition claims that we hold the crown of being argumentative. So, the story goes that this ship sees smoke signals coming from this island. I'm sure you've got the same story. Get up there and they see there's this elderly Jewish man there. And he says, what happened? He says, I got shipwrecked here many, many years ago. And I had to develop a life here for myself. So he says, okay, so what have you done? So he goes and he says, I want to show you my synagogue. He goes, a beautiful structure. And he says, that's my synagogue. And the guy looks over and he sees on the other side of the island another similar structure. He says, what's that? He says, that's the synagogue I don't go to. Yeah. 2 Jews, 3 opinions. If you've ever seen the opening of Woody Allen's show Annie Hall, it starts it off by saying, these 2 Jews are sitting in a restaurant, and one complains to the other, says, the food at this restaurant is so terrible, it's almost inedible. The other one says, you're right, and the portions are so small. It's Woody Allen. Is that we're an argumentative people. But that part of that argument is that we value challenges. We value questions. The idea, there's a Yiddish phrase that says, a good question is better than a bad answer. And we value questions. So much of this night, and if we were to go into greater detail, maybe I think we did when we were up in Rockhampton last year, is that we try to encourage questions. We do things differently to the way we ordinarily do, even that are beyond the power of what is required by Jewish law. Because we want people to ask questions. We want to keep them inquisitive. We want to know that there's no such thing as a bad question. We just want to keep them questioning. And even if I don't have a good answer, so go ask a good answer for your question, so go ask somebody else. Because we want to keep those questions happy, because that's how you keep tradition alive. But when we stop questioning, and we just do. So, tradition is, I'm just trying to think the way I heard it. Tradition is glorified, tradition is nostalgia that is meant to sound holy. Is that we do it because our parents did it, because they did it, because they did it. It's just nostalgia. If you go to church because it just feels good, it's like, that's nice. It's great for you. But your kids aren't going to follow that if that's the only reason. If you remember Christmas dinner at your grandparents' home and the smells and the tastes and the experience, and that's what your kids don't remember that. Now, I'm South African, so one of the great South African foods is called biltong. You ever heard of biltong before? Oh, no. It's made it up to MAckay, hasn't it? So for those who don't know what biltong is, it's a little bit like jerky, but it's just like you basically take a steak and you leave it out in the sun for a few days and you add a lot of salt. That's more or less what it is. So when I eat biltong, it takes me to when I was a kid and we used to go to the safari. I remember sitting in my parents' car looking out at the baboons and chewing and getting it stuck in my teeth and then being parched because it was so salty. It just takes me back to my youth. When my kids eat biltong, all they're asking is, does it taste good? And if it does, they'll eat it. And if it doesn't, they won't. But it can't transport them back to the safari. It can't allow them to see the baboons. So that's what tradition is. And so tradition is the death knell of religion. It is not the savior, it's the death of it. We have to find ways to make religion, ritual, and our values alive for them. Throughout the Torah, multiple times it comes and says, I'm commanding you today. Not I'm commanding you back then, today. This law has to be relevant to you today. It has to have meaning for you today. It can't be something that you're doing purely because it was done for so long. And if you ask any Jew, when does that happen? That's the night of Passover. So, know that it's been a long day for you. I'm ending early because I know when you're at the end of the day, ending 5 minutes early wins you a lot of kudos. Ending one, if you end 1 minute late, you might as well not have spoken. So to that end, thank you so much for hosting me today. I am not going to open to questions, but I'm going to be available for questions to allow all those who need to go somewhere. Please, thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to my next trip to MAckay. Hopefully you'll have me back. But if you have any questions, please come around and speak to me after. Thanks, guys.